The funeral director called me at 7:12 that morning and asked a question I already knew the answer to. "Has your brother confirmed that he's coming?" I stared at the kitchen window, watching rain run down the glass in thin, uneven lines. "No," I said. "He hasn't." There was a pause. Then he quietly said, "I'm sorry." That was the moment I realized my brother really wasn't coming to our mother's funeral. Not because he couldn't. Not because he was out of town. Because he had decided that even her death wasn't enough to bring him back. What I didn't know was that 3 hours before we lowered my mother's coffin into the ground, I was going to discover the reason he'd refused to stand beside me. And when I finally learned the truth, I wasn't sure whether I was angry with my brother. Or with my mother. My name is Daniel, and I'm telling this story because for most of my life, I thought I understood my family. I was wrong. My mother, Margaret, died on a Tuesday morning in November. She was 72. She had been sick for several months, but somehow, even when everyone knew the end was close, I still wasn't prepared for the phone call. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store when the hospital called. "Daniel, I'm afraid your mother passed away peacefully about 20 minutes ago." I remember gripping the steering wheel. I remember looking at the people walking through the parking lot with shopping bags in their hands. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could continue normally when mine had just stopped. My mother and I had our problems, but I loved her. She raised me and my younger brother, Michael, alone after our father left when we were children. At least, that was the story I'd always been told. Michael was 4 years younger than me. When we were kids, he followed me everywhere. If I went fishing, he came with me. If I built a treehouse, he wanted his own corner. If I got into trouble at school, he somehow managed to get into trouble too. We weren't perfect brothers, but we were close. Until we weren't. The distance started when Michael was 17. He and Mom had a terrible argument one night. I remember hearing shouting from upstairs. Doors slammed. Then Michael came downstairs carrying a duffel bag. "I'm leaving," he said. Mom stood in the hallway. "You walk out that door, Michael, and don't expect me to chase you." I thought she was angry. I didn't realize she meant it. Michael left that night. He stayed with a friend for a while, then moved to another city. Over the next 20 years, his contact with Mom became almost non-existent. I asked him about it more than once. Every time, he gave me the same answer. "I don't want to talk about her." I never pushed. That was probably my first mistake. When Mom died, I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. "Michael, Mom is gone. I know things have been complicated, but she's gone. Please come home." He called me back 6 hours later. His voice sounded different. Older. Tired. "I'm not coming, Daniel." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" I said, "I'm not coming to the funeral." "Michael, she's our mother." "I know. She's dead." "I know." His voice cracked slightly on those words. Then he went silent. I lowered my voice. "You don't have to forgive her. You don't have to speak. Just come. Stand at the back if you want. But please come." "No." "Why?" He took a long breath. "Because I already said goodbye to her a long time ago." Then he hung up. I sat there holding my phone. I was furious. For years, I had been the one dealing with Mom's appointments, groceries, medications, hospital visits, and everything else. Michael had stayed away. And now, when she was dead, he couldn't even show up for 1 hour? I convinced myself he was selfish. I told myself he was punishing a dead woman who couldn't defend herself. And part of me resented him for leaving me alone with everything. The funeral was scheduled for Friday afternoon. About 40 people came. Neighbors. Old friends. People from Mom's church. A few relatives. Michael's chair remained empty. I tried not to look at it. But I did. Over and over. After the service, everyone gathered at Mom's house. It was strange seeing so many people in the rooms where she'd lived alone for years. Someone made coffee. Someone brought sandwiches. People whispered about memories. I went upstairs to Mom's bedroom because I needed some air. Her room still smelled like the lavender lotion she always used. On the nightstand was a small wooden jewelry box. I opened it. Inside were photographs. My childhood pictures. Michael's school photos. A picture of Mom holding us both at the beach. I smiled. Then I noticed an envelope underneath the photographs. My name was written on it. Daniel. I opened it. There was a short note. Give this to Michael if he ever asks. I froze. There was no explanation. Just that sentence. I read it twice. Then I turned the envelope over. There was another name written underneath mine. Michael. My hands started shaking. I should have stopped. I didn't. Inside was a letter. Not from Mom. From someone named Thomas. I didn't recognize the name. The first line made my stomach drop. Michael, I know you believe your mother abandoned you, but that isn't what happened. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I kept reading. Thomas explained that he had been Mom's older brother. My uncle. I had never heard of him. According to the letter, our father hadn't simply left. He had taken Michael. Or tried to. When Michael was 17, he had discovered something about his childhood that Mom had spent years hiding. Our father had been involved in serious financial trouble. He had debts. He had been threatening Mom. And according to the letter, he'd tried to convince Michael that Mom was the reason their family had fallen apart. But there was something worse. The night Michael left home, he wasn't simply angry. He believed Mom had lied to him about who his biological father was. I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe properly. I had always believed Michael and I had the same father. The letter suggested otherwise. I kept going. Thomas wrote that Mom had discovered years earlier that our father was not Michael's biological father. Michael's biological father was a man she'd known before meeting him. And Mom had kept it secret because she was terrified that revealing the truth would destroy what little stability the family had left. But Michael eventually found out. Or thought he'd found out. The argument at 17 had been about the secret. Mom had refused to explain. Michael had left believing she'd spent his entire life lying to him. And then came the part that changed everything. Thomas wrote. She didn't abandon Michael. She spent years trying to find him, but he told everyone he didn't want contact. Your mother respected that because she believed chasing him would only hurt him more. I stared at those words. That couldn't be right. Michael had always told me Mom never tried. He'd said she never called. Never wrote. Never came looking. But the letter said she had. There were dates. Addresses. Names. Places where Mom had apparently tried to contact him. Some letters had been returned. Some had never been answered. And then I saw something that made my heart sink. There was a photograph. Michael at 17. Standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. On the back, Mom had written, "My son. I hope someday he understands." I sat there for several minutes. Then I called Michael. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I finally sent him a message. I found Mom's letter. He replied almost immediately. What letter? The one she left for you. No response. Then, 5 minutes later. Daniel, don't open anything else. I stared at the screen. Why? Another message appeared. Because there are things you don't know. I called him. This time, he answered. His voice was shaking. Where are you? Mom's house. Are you alone? Yes. He was quiet. Then he said something I'll never forget. Did she tell you about Dad? I found out he wasn't your biological father. Silence. Then Michael whispered. She never told you either. No. Because she wanted to protect you. I felt a strange mixture of anger and confusion. Protect me from what? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, I'm going to tell you everything. Michael told me that when he was 17, he'd found an old birth certificate hidden inside a box. The name of his biological father was different. He confronted Mom. She admitted the truth. But she wouldn't tell him who the man was. Michael felt betrayed. He accused her of lying his entire life. Then he left. What I hadn't known was that he had actually returned several months later. He came to the house one evening. Mom was asleep. He stood outside for almost an hour. Then he left. Why didn't you go inside? I asked. Because I was angry. He paused. And because I was scared. Scared of what? Finding out she didn't want me. My chest tightened. Michael. She never knew I came. Then he told me the part that hurt the most. Mom had been trying to reach him for years. But she never told me because she was afraid I'd choose sides. And Michael had ignored almost every attempt. Not because he didn't care. Because he was terrified that if he forgave her, he'd have to admit he'd wasted 20 years being angry. I understood then why he refused to attend the funeral. It wasn't because he hated her. It was because he loved her too much. He didn't trust himself to stand beside her coffin without breaking apart. I asked him one question. Did Mom ever meet your biological father? Michael hesitated. Yes. When? Last year. I felt a chill. What? He contacted her. My mother had known where this story was going. She had met the man who was Michael's biological father. And she had never told either of us. Why? Michael's voice became quiet. Because he was dying. I sat down. Apparently, Mom had spent months trying to arrange a meeting between them. Michael refused. He didn't want to meet the man. He told Mom that his real father was the man who raised him. Even if that man had abandoned them. Even if their family had fallen apart. He didn't want another father. He wanted the mother he thought he'd lost. But by then, Mom was already sick. She knew she didn't have much time. So she wrote everything down. The letter I had found wasn't an explanation. It was an apology. Not for having a secret. For waiting too long to tell the truth. Michael eventually came to Mom's house 2 days after the funeral. He stood in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before knocking. When I opened the door, neither of us spoke. Then he hugged me. It was the first time we'd hugged in years. He cried. I cried. And neither of us tried to hide it. We went upstairs together. I gave him the envelope. He sat on Mom's bed and opened it. I left the room. 20 minutes later, I heard him crying. Not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything inside. When he came downstairs, he was holding the letter against his chest. She loved me, he said. I nodded. She always loved you. He looked at me. I know that now. We sat in the kitchen until it got dark. Michael told me he wished he'd gone to the funeral. I told him maybe he wasn't ready. He said, I should have been. I didn't know what to say. Because the truth was, I had spent years judging him too. I thought he didn't care. I thought he was selfish. I thought I was the only one who had lost something when Mom died. But I realized that day that grief doesn't always look like tears at a funeral. Sometimes it looks like staying away. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like refusing to answer the phone because you're terrified of hearing a voice you've spent 20 years missing. A month later, Michael and I went to the cemetery together. It was cold. The grass was wet. We stood beside Mom's grave without saying anything for a while. Then Michael pulled something from his coat. It was a photograph. The same photograph I'd found upstairs. He placed it against the flowers. "I found another one," he said. It was a picture of Mom and Michael when he was little. He was sitting on her shoulders. She was laughing. On the back, Mom had written, "My favorite troublemaker." Michael smiled through his tears. She really knew me. I laughed. She definitely did. We stood there for another few minutes. Then Michael said something that stayed with me. I thought refusing to go to her funeral was my way of punishing her. He looked down at the grave. But really, I was punishing myself. I put my hand on his shoulder. Neither of us could change the past. We couldn't get back the 20 years. We couldn't undo the arguments. We couldn't erase the secrets. But we could stop carrying them. And maybe that's what Mom had wanted all along. Not forgiveness without accountability. Not pretending everything had been perfect. Just the chance for her sons to stop losing each other because of things that happened before either of us understood what being a family really meant. Michael never met his biological father. He decided he didn't need to. He said the man was part of his history, but not his identity. As for Mom, I still have questions. Some days I'm angry with her. Some days I understand her. Most days, I feel both. That's the uncomfortable truth about family. People can love you and still hurt you. They can make terrible choices while believing they're protecting you. And sometimes, the person who seems cruel from the outside is carrying a pain nobody else can see. I used to think my brother skipped our mother's funeral because he didn't care. Now I know he stayed away because he cared more than he knew how to handle. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that we shouldn't always mistake silence for indifference. Sometimes silence is grief. Sometimes anger is love with nowhere to go. And sometimes the person who isn't standing beside you at the funeral is the person who was hurting the most.